This is Joe Rosemaric with Rosemaric Fishing. Today we're going to go and service the spinning reel. You'll need a couple of things. A really small screwdriver, like an eyeglass screwdriver. This here's from Electronics Repair. A medium-sized screwdriver for taking apart the different screws holding the reel together. Some light oil. This here's Quantum Hot Sauce reel oil. It's very low viscosity, flow into cracks and crevices. And then some sort of heavy oil. This here happens to be white lithium grease. Most of the time when you're servicing a spinning reel, you're going to want to change the line out at the same time. I am going to change the line out on this, but I don't happen to have the one that I want right now, so we'll have to do that at a later time. If you want to see a video of that, I have one on my channel, so let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing when you go and service a reel, and usually the easiest, is to take off the handle. So this one here has an external screw mount, so you just loosen the handle with this screw here. Some of these are thumb screws, some of these have a cover with an actual just regular Phillips screw underneath. And you pull that out and you pull your handle out right here. So it'll have a hex to it normally, and then the screw that would go inside of here, passing through the reel. What you want to do is look at the inside of this bearing. Now this particular reel I already know is jammed up, which is why I'm servicing it. What you want to do, this here is the penetrating oil I use. It's bright red and it stays bright red, and you can see it inside the reel the next time you go to service it. Oh, I want to go on the outside of that bearing, and I always try and lubricate both sides of it. And evidently my bottle is getting bad here. Okay, and once I do that, don't need a screw in here. Usually put this hex in, just slide it down in the hole, and use it to turn the reel to go into to spread that grease through the bearings. Now, this one here, the anti-reverse is also jammed, but if I just open the bail here and let some line out, I can go and turn this handle to get that grease into the bearing. You can see now that I let some line out that this will now spin freely, at least in the forward direction. So once you're done with that, you can take the handle out. You won't need it. The next thing you want to do is release your drag that holds your spool on. So the drag on this particular reel is just on top of the spool. You want to turn that counterclockwise. It'll click all the way off. And then once that is completely loose, you just pull your spool off right here, and then that will be disconnected. So once you have that spool off, the next thing you want to do is oil this hinge right here for the bail. Now typically the side with the bail catcher is the side that has the spring in it. I've loosened this just a little already. You can see that gap in there. This is normally sucked down tight. So what you want to do is get some oil in there. You'll find that it's easier to oil this with it loose and not necessarily taking it off, just because of the spring mechanism in here. And I would know because I've disassembled that spring and had to reassemble it, and it can be somewhat tricky depending on the reel that you're servicing. So I just loosen it. I get some grease in there. Like I said, this red grease that you can see very clearly on the parts is very helpful. And you want to go and do that. I always do the spring side first, because that's going to be the one that's more likely to jam. Then I go and work on the opposite side of the bail. you go and you put a drop of oil inside of there. Yeah, this this bottle is busted. Once you're done with those, before you move on to the next step, go ahead and tighten these back up because you won't need to loosen them again. And then that way you don't have parts falling off or being a problem down later in the repair process. Okay, so now we've got the bail oiled and we've got our handle oiled. The next thing we need to do is oil the internal gears. Now you're going to want a small screwdriver for this. This is out of a electronics repair set that I have. An eyeglass screwdriver also would work. And where these screws are is going to vary reel to reel. But there's usually always one that is hidden somewhere that you need to go and account for. And the other thing that would be helpful is if you have a magnetic parts tray, to go in to pull these screws and put them in that parts tray, just because they're all very small and you don't want to lose any of them. I got one right here as well. Eventually what will happen is once you have these screws out, you'll be able to take off this side plate cover and expose the gears. So like on this one, underneath this plastic cover was another screw right here that we have to get out. Now, depending on how frequently you service your reels, this job gets easier every time. One, because you know where the screws are, and two, they're not factory tightened down. It's this does get easier every time you do it. This happens to be a reel that I bought 1 or 2 years ago. This is the first time it's being serviced. Okay. So right now I have 3 screws off, plus one in that cover. And now I'm down into the gears. Now this one here is in, it's in pretty rough shape. I'll get this all the way up in here. So you can see this right here in the worm gear has really old dry grease in it. And there's next to nothing on this gear that turns the spool. So what you're gonna wanna do when you're done, I'll put this in here just for demonstration purposes, is you wanna have oil on that brass worm gear that goes and cause your spool to turn. And then also you're also going to want oil. You can see in the back of this, you can see another gear. That's where that heavy gear oil comes into play. The light gear oil works good for moving parts, but the heavy gear oil, when you have something sealed like the inside of this, tends to work better. So I'm not sure why this particular version is not coming off. This gear should pop up. And if it doesn't, it's because it's a $15 fishing rod. So it looks like I'm not going to be able to disassemble this completely, so I'll have to do this all in situ. So I got some heavy white lithium grease. I'm going to shoot this right in here on that back gear. Now that's going to foam and expand, and you want to make sure you have a towel handy because this can be a mess. If you have a solid grease, think of like a Vaseline type grease. That's kind of what you're looking for when you're using the heavy grease. You can use that light oil, like I showed, that red oil, for both that brass gear and for your spool or your handle attachment. So once you have some oil in there, just put your handle in and turn this 7, 8, 9 revolutions. You want to get really worked in so that all of your gears have oil on them when you're done. Just note that this won't be the smoothest cranking that you ever had, just because the cover goes and actually holds that top gear in place. So it'll wobble and rock on you a little bit. That's something that can definitely be overcome. So now you can see all the way back in that back gear, the whole thing is covered in oil. There's a little bit of oil floating around. I'll get a Q-tip out and kind of clean some of this excess off out here on the front facing. But the you can tell, you know, if you're watching that video, you can see that the gear turns smoother and smoother as you go around there. I mean, even with the wobble, that's turning, well, okay, now the wobble, there you go. Once you have it off the wobble, that's turning significantly smoother than what it was. You can see the oil getting into that brass gear as well. One screw that you don't want to take off is this one right here. This is the spring mechanism that allows you to have reverse travel. Do not take that apart. You will go and there's a little tiny spring, about a third the size of a pencil spring, or a pen spring, that will fall out. You'll struggle to find, and then even if you do find it, you'll struggle to put it back in. And this is coming from somebody who services 15 to 20 reels a year every year. So that is the basic parts of getting everything lubricated. Once you're all lubricated, it's just a matter of reassembly. So since I have this apart and I have access with this leaky bottle, just get some in here in these ball bearings around your reel handle. Get everything nice and lubricated up. It's always one of those, it doesn't hurt to have a little extra grease while you have it apart, just because of the effort required to get it apart. I'll put a couple dabs of that red oil in here and you'll see just how well that goes and covers everything on that brass gear. Yeah, that thing was really dry. It doesn't show up as red as some of the other things, but definitely got some oil down in there so that it's going to function much better once we get this reassembled. If you want, you can flip the reel over, but you'll see there's nothing new that you can access on this side just because of the way that cover is built. Some reels, you'll find out that you'll have to take off this screw and this nut to go and to lift your spool and bail off to go and access the inside of this. It all depends on the specific reel you're working on. So the principles are all the same. It's just a matter of looking at your specific reel. So then what we'd be looking at doing, we put our cover on here. That'll snap in place with our 3 screws on our bottom cover. Then we'll put our spool back on and feed our line through the bail, through the reel. Then we'll go and finally put the handle back in with the screw attachment. So that's all it takes to go and service a spinning reel. Hopefully this was informative. This has been Rosmarek Fishing. Thanks for watching.